the Trump administration has ignited a new and unexpected trade conflict, this time zeroing in on the copper industry with sweeping new tariffs that have sent shockwaves through global markets. On August 5, 2025, President Trump announced significant new tariffs on certain copper imports, citing national security concerns and the need to protect American interests. This move is part of the broader America First strategy, aiming to shield U.S. industries from foreign competition and encourage domestic manufacturing. The decision has alarmed key trading partners, especially Canada, which supplies a significant portion of America's copper. This has raised fears of a new trade war that could disrupt North American supply chains and impact thousands of jobs. The tariffs stem from a Section 232 investigation, a rarely used legal tool that allows the president to act on goods deemed vital to national security, even if it means upsetting allies. The administration claims a strong domestic copper industry is essential for both national defense and economic resilience, hoping to boost U.S. production, create new jobs, and reduce reliance on foreign imports. Copper is crucial for construction, electronics, and transportation. Any disruption in its supply chain could have major consequences for everything from home building to high-tech manufacturing and infrastructure projects. As the U.S. implements these tariffs, the world braces for potential retaliation, market volatility, and a new era of trade uncertainty that could reshape global commerce for years to come. The new tariffs are highly targeted, focusing specifically on semi-finished copper goods such as pipes, tubes, and wiring. These are essential components in both the construction and electronics industries, forming the backbone of modern infrastructure and technology. By zeroing in on these products, the policy aims to address vulnerabilities in sectors that are critical to the U.S. economy. A 50% tariff now applies to these imported copper products, a significant increase designed to protect American manufacturers who have been struggling to compete with a flood of cheaper imports. This move is intended to level the playing field, giving domestic producers a fighting chance to regain market share and invest in innovation. Notably, raw copper materials such as ores, concentrates, cathodes, and anodes are exempt from these tariffs. This exemption is deliberate, ensuring that U.S. refineries and manufacturers can still access the essential raw inputs they need from global suppliers without facing higher costs or supply disruptions. This distinction is crucial. By sparing raw materials, the policy avoids crippling domestic producers who rely on imported copper to keep their operations running smoothly. It's a balancing act between protection and practicality. The official justification for these tariffs is national security. Following a Section 232 investigation, officials concluded that heavy dependence on imported semi-finished copper products poses a risk to the health and resilience of U.S. industry, especially in times of global uncertainty or conflict. The administration frames the tariffs as a strategic necessity, emphasizing that this is not just about economics, but about safeguarding critical supply chains and ensuring the nation's industrial independence. By targeting finished goods while exempting raw inputs, the policy aims to boost U.S. manufacturing capacity and competitiveness, all without causing major disruptions to the broader copper supply chain that so many industries depend on. The hope is that these measures will spur new investment, encourage expansion, and create high-quality jobs in the production of advanced copper products, strengthening the entire sector. However, whether this selective protectionism will truly strengthen the industry or simply create new challenges, such as higher prices or trade tensions, remains a subject of intense debate among experts, businesses, and policymakers. Ultimately, the outcome of these tariffs will play a pivotal role in shaping the future of U.S. copper manufacturing and determining the country's position in the highly competitive global market for years to come. The newly imposed 50% tariff on copper products is a significant and unprecedented barrier, sending shockwaves through the global copper market and drawing intense attention from both industry insiders and policymakers. This sweeping measure specifically targets $1.2 billion in annual imports of semi-finished copper products, a substantial portion of the U.S. copper supply chain. The main focus is on copper pipes, tubes, and wiring, essential components for construction, electronics, and manufacturing, making the impact felt across multiple sectors. Among the most affected suppliers are Canada, Mexico, South Korea, and several European nations, all of which have long-standing trade relationships with the U.S. Canadian exports alone, exceeded $300 million last year, making Canada one of the largest foreign sources of these copper goods for the U.S. market. Now, Canadian producers face a steep competitive disadvantage, with some factories already feeling the pressure and uncertainty about future orders. The policy is designed to shift market share from foreign to domestic producers, aiming to revitalize U.S. manufacturing and encourage new investment in American copper facilities. If successful, this move could fundamentally alter the U.S. copper landscape, reshaping supply chains and production patterns for years to come. Notably, raw materials such as copper cathodes and concentrates remain exempt from these tariffs, ensuring that U.S. manufacturers still have access to essential inputs. This exemption preserves critical supply chains from major mining countries like Chile and Peru, which are vital to keeping U.S. industry running smoothly. In fact, U.S. imports of copper cathodes alone topped $3 billion last year. If these raw materials were included in the tariffs, the shock to the market would be far greater and potentially disruptive. While the tariffs are expected to generate additional government revenue, their primary purpose is to drive investment in U.S. production and reduce reliance on imported finished copper goods. The hope is that these measures will spark expansion of domestic copper production lines, create new jobs, and encourage the construction of modern copper factories across the country. Ultimately, the administration will judge success by increased domestic capacity, more American-made copper products, and a steady decline in import figures over time. This so-called surgical approach penalizes finished goods while carefully protecting the flow of raw materials, aiming for a balanced impact on the industry. The stakes are high for both U.S. industry and global suppliers, as the world watches to see how these changes will ripple through international trade. Only time will tell if this bold intervention delivers the intended results, or if it triggers new challenges for the U.S. copper industry and its trading partners. The copper tariffs jolted financial markets, but the reaction was mixed. U.S. copper futures fell, as traders were relieved the tariffs didn't cover all copper products. The exclusion of raw materials calmed nerves in major copper-producing nations like Chile and Peru. Within the U.S., downstream manufacturers welcomed the move, seeing it as overdue protection. However, companies that rely on imported semi-finished copper fear higher costs and supply disruptions. Their global supply chains could be upended, making their products less competitive. The industry is now closely analyzing the order's details, weighing potential benefits against risks. There's concern that higher prices could ripple through construction and manufacturing, ultimately hitting consumers. The key question: will the gains for some U.S. producers outweigh the broader economic costs? The risk of retaliation from trading partners adds another layer of uncertainty. The industry faces a period of adjustment, with the long-term impact still unclear. The tariffs are paired with new domestic support measures for the copper industry. A key provision now requires that 25% of all high-quality copper scrap generated in the U.S. be sold to domestic buyers. This aims to ensure American manufacturers have reliable access to valuable scrap, reducing reliance on imports and supporting recycling. By keeping more scrap at home, the administration hopes to lower input costs and strengthen the entire domestic copper value chain. This two-pronged approach, tariffs plus domestic support, is designed to foster a more resilient, self-sufficient industry. The ultimate goal: reshore production, boost investment, and secure the U.S. copper supply chain for the long term. Canada, a major supplier of semi-finished copper to the U.S., responded swiftly to the tariffs. Ottawa is preparing retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, raising the specter of a new trade war between two deeply integrated economies. Canadian retaliation could target politically sensitive U.S. sectors, escalating the conflict and disrupting cross-border supply chains. The European Union is also watching closely, warning of coordinated responses if U.S. protectionism expands. The EU may link its response to broader trade and investment disputes, increasing transatlantic tensions. Major raw copper suppliers like Chile and Peru have reacted more calmly, since their exports of raw materials remain exempt. However, they're monitoring the situation, wary of any future expansion of U.S. tariffs. The risk of a broader global backlash remains if the U.S. widens its trade restrictions. For now, the copper dispute is a flashpoint in a larger, unsettled trade environment. The copper dispute may be just the beginning. President Trump has threatened tariffs of up to 250% on imported pharmaceuticals, a move that could dramatically raise healthcare costs and disrupt medicine supplies. The administration is also pressuring the European Union, tying potential new tariffs to investment commitments. This aggressive use of tariffs as leverage marks a shift in U.S. trade diplomacy, making negotiations more contentious. The constant threat of new tariffs creates uncertainty for global businesses and discourages cross-border investment. Allies are increasingly wary as trust in stable trade rules erodes. The world faces the risk of a prolonged, unpredictable era of trade conflict. The copper tariffs are not the end of the story. The presidential order includes a review process, with the possibility of expanding tariffs if U.S. industry goals aren't met by 2026. This keeps businesses and trading partners in a state of uncertainty, forcing them to adapt to shifting policies. The administration will track domestic investment, production, and import levels to decide on future actions. If targets aren't reached, more copper products, including raw materials, could face tariffs. Companies must build more resilient supply chains to cope with ongoing unpredictability. Foreign governments are preparing for further negotiations and potential escalation. The review process ensures the copper trade dispute will remain a live issue for years. The Trump administration's copper tariffs have opened a new, contentious chapter in global trade. Justified as national security, the policy aims to protect U.S. manufacturers, but has triggered threats of retaliation and market uncertainty. The targeted approach spares raw materials but challenges key partners like Canada, risking a broader trade war. Domestic support measures and a long-term review process add complexity and prolong uncertainty. The move is part of a wider shift toward protectionism, with potential spillovers into other sectors like pharmaceuticals. The world now faces a critical question: is this a temporary disruption, or the start of a permanent unraveling of globalized trade? The answer will shape the future of international commerce for years to come.